I stuck the photo up crooked on the wall, because it was the only place we could still be seen together. For 70 years they said I made him up, that women like me don't get to have stories. But he was real, and he loved me in silence. During the cold of a war, no one even remembers anymore. My name is Graciela Moore. I'm 91 years old, and I live in a nursing home room that overlooks a wall that never changes. Before this, I lived among abandoned railroads, caring for elderly, people like me, while keeping hidden, sewn inside the lining of a suitcase, the only proof I ever loved a man during the war. No one ever asked what I lost, and maybe I forgot how to answer. But today my voice shakes less than my silence, because the handkerchief he used to dry my one tear fell out of the suitcase. And I know it's finally time to speak. Come sit with me, sweetheart. This story isn't easy to tell. It's been kept quiet for more than 70 years, sewn between silence, longing, and a war no one wanted to hear about. Take a deep breath. Listen with your heart, not your ears, because maybe, just maybe, some part of you is also waiting for a voice that never came. If this story touches you, like it still touches me every time I close my eyes, subscribe to this channel, like the video, and share it with someone who carries an old love or a memory that still beats. Because some stories aren't just memories, they're survival. The lantern light still swings from the ceiling hook, even without wind. It feels like time in here breathes on its own, like the whole nursing home has ancient lungs that moan with memory. My eyes are fixed on the wall, or rather, the one thing I dared to hang on it. The masking tape can barely hold it anymore, and the photo, folded at the corners, keeps slipping. Still, every morning I get up from bed and fix it with trembling fingers. I fix Luca. They say old folks make up love stories. They say it with that smile that doesn't reach the eyes. But me, I only loved once. Not the kind of passion you scream from a window. It was more like a slow fever, a warmth tucked between seams, between moments when we weren't allowed to breathe. Let alone love. Luca. Non mettere la radio troppo alta, Grace. Vogliono silenzio nel corridoio. I still hear it. His voice is like thread through a cut finger. Thin, but piercing. In that photo, his beret is crooked, and his eyes squint from the German sun. A makeshift snapshot taken behind the supply shed, among boxes of morphine and the sting of ether. I have no other. That's what's left. The masking tape may give out before I do. No one here asks who he was. They think he's a brother, a cousin, a ghost from my youth. They're not interested in women who were in the war. Nurses don't have stories, only hands. Hands that press, that clean, that hold bodies until they stop breathing. But never our own hands. The white wall stares back at me, a void full of echoes. Every day this room shrinks. Or maybe it's me who's shrinking. I don't know anymore. My skin, thin as old gauze, carries more scars than the journal hidden in the suitcase lining. Ah, the suitcase. But that's another confession. Today, for the first time, I felt my mouth weaker than my silence. I spoke aloud. I think I said, "Luca, if you're out there, forgive me." But he never needed my forgiveness. It was the world that sinned against us. He had no medal. Neither of us did. Just promises. He promised me summer. When the sun comes back, we'll get married, okay? He said it with a pine needle in his hair, picked up off the wet ground. I laughed, told him if he really loved me, he had to give me something real. He took off his chain, small, thin, no metal. This is my cross, Graciela. Now it's yours. I put it on over my stained coat. It felt like God had started breathing near us again. But he stopped soon after. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I smell fresh blood mixed with lavender. I don't know if it was the soap we used or just a memory of what he used to say. Le tue mani profumano di lavanda, anche quando il mondo puzza di morte. Your hands smell like lavender, even when the world reeks of death. These are the war times no one wants to hear about. These are the forgotten heroes. And me? I was just a nurse with love hidden in my apron pocket. You know, just yesterday, the new caregiver asked if I wanted to paint the wall in my room. Said white is tiring, that blue brings peace. I told her blue reminds me of the sea that stole him from me. She didn't understand. Him who, Grandma? I just said, the only one who looked at me like I was more than a uniform. I didn't say anything else. She wouldn't have understood that, in wartime, loving is an act of defiance. My coat is still here, folded at the bottom of the suitcase. It has a crooked stitch at the wrist, where I sewed in a dried drop of blood. I think it was his, or mine. These days, anything I can't wash out, I keep. The things that can be washed lose their truth. In the photo, Luca's eyes are fading. I keep wondering, do memories fade like that too? Will I wake up one day and not remember the sound of his voice, saying torno presto? Maybe that's why I hung the photo. Not to show, but to hold on. My war didn't end in trenches. It stayed suspended in time. Between letters never sent and a radio that only plays static. They told me I should donate the photo to the city museum. You were one of the women in the war. That has historical value. Value? They don't know some things aren't meant to be given away. If I gave it up, I'd kill what's left of me. The living memory of someone who dared to love me is in the middle of chaos. He used to call me Mia Graciela Coraggiosa, my brave Grace. Me, who cried in secret behind the infirmary every time we lost one of our boys. Me, who shivered not from the snow, but from the fear I'd never see him again. And I didn't. Not at the end. All I got was a transfer order, a dirty paper. No explanation. I folded the photo, stuffed it into the suitcase with angry, stiff fingers, and left, hearing the radio's frequency, unable to tune into his voice. I never could again. All since that day, every radio sound turned into mourning. Even now, the nursing home's radio is broken. All it does is hum that low static, like someone's trying to speak and the world just refuses to listen. Sometimes I think it's Luca. Or maybe it's just my mind searching for sound where there's only silence. But it's not a delusion. I was there. I saw love born. Between scalpels and muffled screams. And no one can take that away. Not time. Not worn-out masking tape. Before I sleep tonight, I'll tape the photo again. Maybe tomorrow it'll fall. Maybe I will first. But the photo stayed. The story stayed. The emotional story of a nurse who dared to love during the war, and who now, in her late justice, can finally say he was real, and he loved me. In the winter, under the bed, the suitcase creaks softly, as if whispering, "It's time." The suitcase is under the bed. It slept beside me for 70 years. I never unpacked it. Never. Not when I came back from Europe. Not when I got kicked out of my sister's house for talking too much about the dead. Not when I moved into a rented trailer with peeling wallpaper and a leak dripping over the stove. The suitcase followed me, like a dog that never forgets its owner. It doesn't lock anymore. Rust ate away the hinges the same way time ate away my certainties. But I still know the sound it makes when I pull it by the cracked leather. A low moan, almost human. Almost mine. The caregivers here think it's just a quirk. Old people and their stuff. They say it in that rehearsed sweet tone. "Let's throw this away, Grace. Look, it's full of dust mites." But they don't know that inside is everything I have left of myself. Today, for the first time in decades, I set the suitcase on my lap. I weighed its soul, and I knew it was time to look, to really look. The first thing I saw was the coat, folded with such care it hurt me. I had wrapped it like a body that deserved respect. The cuff still holds that stain. It's not wine, it's not mud, it's blood, dry, faint, and old. It was Luca's. Or maybe it belonged to the boy who died clinging to a broken rosary, staring into my eyes, whispering, "Mama," in the wrong language. I just stroked his forehead and said, "Go in peace," silently. I touched the coat with my fingertips. The worn cotton texture brought back the field surgery room. The smell of alcohol, muffled voices, stifled screams. I felt my own sweat again. That cold sweat that doesn't come from the body, but from the soul being ripped out. Under the coat, there was the photo. Not the one on the wall. Another, smaller, older, torn on the left edge. Luca's not in this. 1. It's just me. Young, hair tied in a messy bun, holding a bucket of bloodied gauze. I took that photo myself in a silly moment. Used a camera I borrowed from the base chaplain. I thought it would be nice to remember who I was, but now I see. I was never just that. I was silence and resistance. I was one of the women in the war that no one saw, and who now only exists at the bottom of this suitcase. In the side pocket, I found his notes. So small they looked like clothing tags. But they were love in code form. Snow at 5 p.m.? It meant behind the mess hall, where the world forgets to breathe. I'd fold those little papers and hide them in my apron pocket. Later, I stitched a tiny diary into the lining with white thread. Inside are dates embroidered like prayers. February 3rd, April 9th, May 17th. Each one is an altar. At the bottom of the suitcase rests the envelope with the metal cross, the one he took from around his neck. It doesn't shine anymore, but it still beats, as if it carries the final pulses of our time together. The suitcase has a smell, not of mold, like people think, but of damp hospital halls, rain on a trench, coat, cheap base coffee, the smell of war times, the smell of waiting, of forced courage. As I touched each object, I felt a seam come undone, not in the coat, in me. I never unpacked that suitcase because it was my shelter against forgetting. If I took everything out, I'd have to accept that the world wasn't coming back. Neither was he. Once, in the 70s, I tried to open it on a sunny day. I was living in a rented house at the end of a train line. I opened the windows, took a deep breath. But the moment I unzipped it, I heard a train whistle far off, and I fell apart, zipped it all back up, the suitcase, and my heart. I think I was afraid of late justice, afraid that time would charge me for the love I never fully lived. Not today. Today is different. Today the silence feels softer, more open to memory, to truth. You know. I stitched the suitcase from the inside, literally. Between the lining and the fabric, I hid a handkerchief. It has the letter L embroidered on it, and a drop of perfume I can't smell anymore. But I swear it's still there when I close my eyes. When I moved into this nursing home, I thought about leaving it in storage. They said, "We have lockers, Miss Grace." But how do you store a tomb in a cabinet? This is my black box, my invisible battlefield, my reliquary. The suitcase was never luggage. It was a witness to a moving story the world never wanted to hear, of a woman who healed other people's wounds, but never her own. Today I looked at everything inside with new eyes, and I realized maybe it wasn't cowardice that made me keep it all. Maybe it was love, a love that didn't show off, but held on, like a handkerchief you never wash. I closed the suitcase with trembling hands, pressed the leather with my whole palm. I felt it breathe. Or maybe it was me. Or both. Then I slowly pushed it back under the bed. But this time, I left one of the zippers open. A small gesture. A breath. Maybe someone will open it tomorrow. Maybe never. But today it was unpacked from the inside out. And before the night takes me, I leave this sentence hanging in the air, like a stitch that hasn't closed yet. The next time someone asks who I was, I'll say, I was the woman who stitched silence into her suitcase lining, and still survived. The radio hums softly, and for a moment I think I hear someone whisper my name. But it's not coming from the wall. It's coming from the floor. From where the suitcase is, the radio crackles again. That sound of static soothes me more than any lullaby ever could. The young folks say it's just noise, but to me it's mourning in memory form. Sometimes when the afternoon drags slow across the cracks of this nursing home, the static shifts tone. And I remember when the radio was the only thing between fear and hope, between me and Luca. Back then, the radio was king. God went silent during the bombings, but the radio, it spoke. And it was through the radio that I heard his name for the first time. Volontario Luca Ferrante, avanzamento a supervisione comunicativa. The voice reading the notices sounded bureaucratic, tired, but his name just hung there, like it had been said too slowly, like it was meant for me. I was at the back of the infirmary, organizing penicillin vials on a metal tray. The soldiers' voices outside were muffled by the wet tarp covering the camp. It was winter, the kind that bites your bones from under your skin. And I was shivering. not from the cold, but because that name made me stop. The tray clanged on the wooden floor and scattered the vials like beads from a profane rosary. Luca Ferrante. I whispered it, like someone taking communion with a sacred word. After that, I started finding excuses to go to the communications tent. I need to pick up the inventory. They sent me to get new batteries. Little lies, told with lowered eyes, but every step felt like crossing a border. And there he was, sitting by the radio, headphones pressing into his dark hair, eyes focused on a notebook filled with signals. He spoke softly, almost a whisper, like someone asking permission to exist. But there was strength in his silence, like he carried all the voices the world had abandoned inside his chest. One day, I dropped a pair of forceps near his table, and he said, "Attenta, infermiera, le pinze non volano." Careful, nurse, forceps don't fly. And I smiled, for the first time in months. Smiling was dangerous in that place. Joy could be seen as disrespect, but he made the impossible feel light. After that, he started leaving notes, tucked in bandage boxes, behind gauze packs, sometimes in a bottle of saline. 17 dietro la mensa, and I knew. I knew that at 5 p.m. the world would stop for 15 minutes. Behind the mess hall, between empty barrels and hanging sheets, he'd tell me about Milan, his grandmother, his little sister's long eyelashes. And I'd say little, but I listened to everything, and I felt alive. The first time he said my name over the radio, it was an accident. "Graziella, mi senti?" It was off protocol. The other operator scolded him and he coughed, embarrassed. But me, I nearly fell to my knees. Someone said my name out loud in that frozen camp. Someone knew I existed. Graziella. I was never just Grace after that. Never just a nurse. That base held too much pain to keep in your body. So he and I created a language, our own. It wasn't Italian or English. It was made of quick touches, long glances, stitches hidden in the coat's cuff. I even embroidered his name inside a sock, Luca, in black thread, the only kind that never fades. One night the radio went silent, completely. Maybe the batteries ran out, or maybe we ran out of courage. But that silence was a hole in the chest, a blackout that swallowed the world. I didn't hear his name that day, nor the days after. And that's when I started sewing a diary inside my apron pocket, with tiny thread, almost invisible. I wrote everything I wanted to tell him. The boy in bed 8 died yesterday. Today I smelled pine for the first time in weeks. I bled again, but only on the inside. It was my way of keeping his frequency alive. Now, here in this white room, with the old radio at my feet, I keep wondering, does anyone still remember his voice? Does anyone else hear this static and think, he's trying to speak again? These are the stories that don't fit into medals. Nurse stories don't turn into statues. But they're the ones that bleed the most and survive, inside. Yesterday, the nursing aide tried to clean the radio, said it was grimy. But I asked her to leave it. The dust, the crackling, the stuck buttons. That's all him. That's all me. At the base once, he told me, "When this is over, I want a world with you, and no other sound." But what came instead was the sound of a transfer order, and then silence. Today, the radio started crackling again at 5 p.m., the same hour we used to meet behind the mess hall. And I swear on everything I've lost, I heard his name. Faint, low, like a breath, or a memory refusing to die. Maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe it's just my mind stitching memories together. But inside, his voice is still stitching something in me. Maybe hope, or maybe it's just pain, braided with longing. Today, I didn't turn the radio off, left it on, even when the aide said it keeps others awake, said the static ruins their sleep. But me, I sleep better with it, with that old noise, with that ghost calling me back. Tomorrow maybe he won't speak again, or maybe it'll be the last time I hear him. But today he said my name, and that is more than the world's given me in decades. Under the bed, the suitcase exhales, and I know it still holds the notes, all of them. They say faith is the last thing to die, but I watched it die right in front of my eyes, and it never came back. It was that winter, the cruelest I ever lived through, and I've lived through many, but none so white, none so dirty. I remember the field hospital had been set up between twisted pine trees that bent like they were praying. But no one prayed there anymore. Prayers dried up along with the bodies. It was a winter of cracks, bones breaking, ice splitting, grief held in. The floor was always damp, and the scent of death hid in the corners of the canvas walls, even when we opened the flaps to let the cold cut through. The cold came in, but the pain stayed. Back then, hope didn't speak, it just stared, and the stare belonged to those lying down, waiting for too much morphine or too little salvation. It was during that winter that Luca said a phrase that still wounds me today. Se almeno Dio avesse una voce, magari somiglierebbe alla tua. If God had a voice, maybe it would sound like yours. But by then, I already knew God had left the war. I remember. The boy. He was 16. Maybe younger. His name was Nathan, but he signed his letters as Nate. He had a photo of his mother pinned to his shirt collar. He always said he'd go back to her. Always. And he smiled, even with lungs torn apart from coughing. One night, I went to change the bandage on his chest, and I noticed his skin was too cold. The fever had given way to silence. He looked at me with eyes that didn't yet understand what it meant to lose, and he asked, "Do you think God knows my name?" I held his hand. His rosary was broken, missing beads, like it had been bitten by the war. He smiled, and died smiling at me, with the shattered rosary between his fingers. That was it. On that folding bed, on that night when all the world's bells went silent, that's when I lost my faith. I kept the rosary. Yes, it's still here with me. I never told anyone, not even the priest who came to visit me 3 months later. He said his prayers, anointed my forehead with perfumed oil, and asked if I wanted to confess. I said, "Confess what? That I survived?" Luca noticed. He knew something inside me had snapped. The next night, he waited for me behind the infirmary. He handed me a small piece of bread wrapped in a napkin, said it was the forgotten one's last supper, and he placed my cross back around my neck, But I no longer believed. Not in him, not in God, not in happy endings. Even so, his presence was the only miracle I could tolerate. He told me my hands smelled like lavender, even when they were covered in pus, feces, and blood. I cried, but only inside. Outside, I was iron, steel, gauze, surgical stitch. That winter changed me, from woman to shadow, from faith to denial. I stopped wearing the cross, hid it in the suitcase. Luca asked why, and I said, because today, even God is cold. From that day on, I stopped praying, but I started writing like bleeding. I sewed new pages into my hidden diary and embroidered a prayer of my own. Let the next body not be a boy. Let the next name not remind me of my brother. Let the next love not leave. But love left too, without warning. The cross I gave, Luca. He kissed it and promised to give it back in summer. But summer never came. The pines lost their needles too soon. The ground turned to mud, the bodies to numbers. And we, the women in war, learned to swallow our screams and smile with tired eyes. Today, when I close my eyes, I don't see saints. I see Nate, smiling, with the broken rosary and my trembling hand. The rosary is at the bottom of the suitcase, still with a drop of blood on the cross. Dry, faint, eternal. I don't wash it. I don't touch it. I just remember. Yesterday, one of the caregivers invited me to go to Mass in the chapel. Said it would be good for the soul. I smiled and said, my soul's been in a trench for decades. She didn't understand. But how could they? How could they know that late justice is when the world finally admits that faith can die, and still we go on loving? Because yes, even without faith, I loved, and I still love, in the silence, in the radio static, in the scent of the coat, in the sound of the wind now whispering against the glass. And maybe faith didn't die. Maybe it just went into hiding. In that last glance between Luca and me, in the promise of summer, in the cross he took with him. Maybe. The radio crackles, the suitcase pulses, and there's a soft noise, like footsteps in the snow. It was a night like so many others. Or at least that's what I thought. In war, repetition is the lie we tell ourselves. Today will be like yesterday. Today he'll still be there. But that night, the world went silent, and nothing was ever the same again. I remember the smell, not death, that one I already knew, but a new, sharper scent. Of wet paper, of burnt rubber, of time tearing apart. The wind blew cold, with a fury like a person's. The tents of the field hospital swayed like mourning veils, and the sounds! Oh, the sounds! The military radio coughed out static. The soldiers whispered as if something sacred was about to fall. Then the officer walked in. Firm steps. Muddy boots, a folded envelope in hand. He didn't look anyone in the eye. I was finishing bandaging the arm of a young man with milk-colored eyes, wounded, but still able to smile when I passed. I didn't get to finish. The officer called my name. Graciela Moore, immediate transfer order. Just like that. Cold. Dry. Like he was calling me to pick up trash. I tried to ask why, but the answer was in his eyes. Lowered. Guilty. No explanation. They said a vehicle would take me before dawn. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Crying there was weakness, and I was already weak inside. I went to my quarters, grabbed the suitcase, stuffed the wrinkled coat inside, folded the photo of Luca into fourths, as if folding it could make the pain smaller. The suitcase groaned when I closed it, like it too knew this was an ending. I looked for him. Luca. Searched every tent, behind the mess hall, in the radio shack. Transferred 2 days ago. That's what they told me. But I saw the soldier's eyes. She was lying. His frequency had gone silent, his voice erased. I sat on the edge of the dirt road, with the suitcase at my feet and my heart in my hands. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. In the distance, the radio still played. A song with no lyrics, scratched by time, and I recognized the melody. It was the one he used to whistle to make me laugh without saying a word. But I didn't laugh. I just closed my eyes and let the song cut through me, like a knife, like a promise, like a cross. The road darkened faster than usual, like even the light was in mourning. When the Jeep arrived, I got in without a word. The suitcase creaked on my lap. My eyes didn't blink, as if they wanted to hold that place one last time, even as it faded. From the back seat, I saw the pines curled against the cold, saw the tent where I washed the feet of dying soldiers, saw the glow of the radio still on. And I didn't see Luca. I never saw Luca again. The world went silent, and I became deaf to sound. That night I knew for certain. The war hadn't killed me, but it had made me inaudible. Like everything I was. Became static. I wrapped the photo in a handkerchief, embroidered the date along the edge. The night the world went silent. It's in the suitcase. Still there, folded between the coat and the notes. The next morning, no one was waiting for me. I arrived at a forgotten base with no flag. Was greeted by a sergeant who barely knew my name. He looked over my papers and said, "They sent you here by mistake," but it was too late. There was no going back. No message, no Luca. That's where I started working again, without faith, without love, without sound. And every night when I closed my eyes, I went back to that road, to the radio static, to the note that never came. Now, in this white silence of a room, I finally understand what that night took from me. The certainty of being heard. Today I no longer expect to hear his voice. But sometimes, when the rain hits the window with the weight of memory, when the radio crackles like a wounded animal, when the suitcase sighs under the bed, I return to that night, to that final period. And I wonder if he had known I would leave like that. No letter, no hug, no handkerchief. Would he have left a sign? I opened the drawer. The handkerchief embroidered with the letter L is there. Still. But today it seems to pulse. I crossed the Atlantic on a ship that smelled of iodine and broken promises. It was white on the outside and hollow on the inside. They called it a hospital ship. But there was no healing on board, only containment. Only return. When they called me to board, I didn't ask questions. I had already lost Luca, lost my post, lost the last bit of faith slipping through my fingers. All I had left was the suitcase and the silence. The deck was slippery, the air heavy with salt and memory. Inside, the narrow hallways echoed like rib cages, footsteps and muffled sobs bouncing off the steel. Cold lights hung from low ceilings, and the rocking of the sea made memories jostle inside me like expired medicine. I shared a bunk with a girl. Her name was Ruth. She had hair like faded embers, and eyes that laughed all the time. She talked about flowers, dreamed of opening a flower shop in Maine, showed me a lavender sketch she embroidered on her mother's handkerchief, said the world would bloom again. I just kept sewing. Ruth called me the mute who stitches sorrow. She talked and talked and talked, and I, with a needle in hand, stitched dates in silence. February 3rd, April 9th, May 17th. The dates Luca left me, the ones I never could erase. I didn't talk about him. Not about the base, not about the note trapped at the bottom of the suitcase. I mentioned lavender once, just to see her smile. Told her someone on the battlefield once said my hands smelled like it. She laughed. Then you were already a flower, even among the dead. But I knew the flower had dried. On the third night, a storm hit. The ship twisted like a wounded beast. Beds shifted. The halls filled with nausea, prayer and fear. Ruth held my hand. And for the first time, I cried. Softly, soundlessly. Like washing from the inside what the sea couldn't reach. She told me, "When we touch land, will you write to me?" I nodded without promising. The next day, she was gone. Some infection, a fragile heart, a goodbye with no warning. Her handkerchief with the embroidered lavender was left on the upper bunk. I kept it. It's in my suitcase, next to mine. On the other side of the ship, they handed out medals. Blue ribbons, cheap metal, no names. For services rendered in wartime. That's what they said. They handed it to me without looking at my face. I returned it quietly. No one noticed. Ownerless, medals always looked like hanging ghosts to me. On the last night aboard, I stood alone on the deck. The sea was still. The moon, dull. And I heard the captain's radio crackling in a language I didn't understand. I closed my eyes and imagined his frequency. Luca's. Imagined he was still speaking. That his voice still lived between the lost waves, but the static one. When I disembarked, no one was waiting. No signs. No name shouted. Just a wet staircase. A grey port. A breath both knew. And empty. From there I walked alone. The suitcase scraped the stone floor with a harsh sound. Each step was a burial. I passed rows of soldiers hugging their families, past flowers, letters, kisses, and me. I held my silence in my lap. I think that's the moment it was truly born. My silence, not as absence, but as presence. The presence of everything I couldn't say, of everything I couldn't hold. Ruth didn't come back. Luca didn't come back, and me. I came back changed. That night I stitched the suitcase lining with black thread, closed all the notes inside, and made myself a promise. Never unpack again, never speak again. But the suitcase knows, the sea knows, and now maybe someone else needs to know too. That's why I'm writing. Because the ship brought my body home, but left my voice shipwrecked. And if my story still beats today, it's not for me. It's for Ruth, For Luca, for Nate, the boy with the broken rosary, for all the forgotten heroes the sea couldn't swallow. Here, in this nursing home room, where the wind taps the glass, like blind longing. I hear the suitcase sigh again, and I realize the silence it carries still hasn't said everything. Just noticed Ruth's handkerchief shifted inside the suitcase. It's on top now, as if it's trying to tell me something. They say we only truly disappear when no one remembers our name. But I've learned it's possible to vanish, even while alive, even with scars. Even after doing everything right. That's what happened to me. I came home with wounded hands, an emptied heart, and a suitcase full of truths no one wanted to hear. I thought there'd be an envelope waiting for me. A thank you, a confirmation, proof that I was there, that I had existed. But all I found was silence. And silence doesn't. Signed documents. I went to the Veterans Department, took a number. Waited for hours in a room that smelled like grease and damp paper. When I was finally called, the woman behind the desk didn't even lift her eyes. Full name? Graciela Moore. She typed, made a face, and said, "We don't have an active service record under that name." I froze. I was on the front lines. Germany. Field hospital. July 1952 to March 1955. She repeated, "Doesn't show up." It felt like someone was scooping out my insides with a wooden spoon. Like every day I'd held a dying hand had been a dream. I showed her the nameless medal, the stamped transfer slip, the diary sewn with white thread. She smiled, a soulless smile. Those things don't have official validity. And then she said, "Maybe you were just an assistant, or a civilian volunteer. Assistant, volunteer. Maybe." I left without finishing the sentence, with the echo of that maybe hammering inside my skull. It was like I'd made everything up, like the war had given me a fever that turned into delusion. I went back to Asheville, rented a trailer near the abandoned train tracks. There, between rusted freight cars and cracked shingles, I started over. Worked caring for the elderly, hands that trembled like mine, mouths that forgot their own children's names. I was patient, precise, but no one ever called me nurse again. Just Miss Grace who helps. Sometimes when a train passed dragging its metal weight through the night, I'd close my eyes and hear the bass's frequency again. I'd imagine Luca's voice saying, "Graciela, mi senti?" And I'd answer silently, "I do, but no one else does." I stitched a new notebook, hidden in the back of the sink drawer. Didn't use ink. I embroidered everything, with white thread, so no one could see, so no one could say it was made up. There, I documented every patient I lost, every name forgotten, every missing file. One day a social worker knocked on the door, said she was gathering records of former combatants. I opened my mouth to speak, but she interrupted. "Only veterans with formal documentation." I closed the door, and the journal. That day I ripped the pages out, but kept the thread. To this day, I use that thread to mend socks, to reinforce the hem of my old coat, to remind myself I existed, even if the world says otherwise. Now, in this nursing home room, with the smell of expired powder and recycled prayers, I wonder if other women disappeared this way too. If other nurses' stories were lost because they weren't written on the right pages. I think of Ruth, the flower shop that never bloomed. I think of all of us who dressed wounds in the dark, who wiped away tears that weren't allowed to fall. There were many of us, but now I feel like just one, the nurse who never existed. And yet, when the radio crackles, when the suitcase breathes, when the needle glides through fabric, I know my absence has shape, has scent, has a heartbeat. This emotional story, denied on paper, lives in the fold of a garment, in the scar on my wrist, in the missing button on my coat. Today I laid the coat on the bed. The stain on the cuff looks like it's grown, or maybe my eyes are finally seeing more. I picked up Ruth's handkerchief, embroidered a tiny G in the corner. G for grace, G for guerra, war, G for grito. The scream I never gave. Just now, the caregiver knocked, said they're making a photo wall for veterans, asked if I'd like to participate. I said I didn't have a photo from the war. She smiled kindly. Any photo will do. What matters is the story. I closed the suitcase slowly and thought, maybe tomorrow I'll hang the crooked one on the wall. For years I wrote letters to someone who may have never breathed again. Luca. I wrote because words, when kept too long, grow roots in the bones, and I didn't want to rot from the inside. The first letter I wrote was still on the ship, 2 days after Ruth died. It was scribbled on a piece of inventory paper with a pen borrowed from a Polish nurse. It began like this: "Today the sea didn't scream. Maybe because you're not in it." I didn't really know what to write. It felt like learning a new language. The language of someone writing without knowing if they'll ever be read. But I kept going, out of need, out of desperation, out of love. 1 letter a month, sometimes 2, sometimes none. There were days when the weight of the world pressed so hard on my shoulders that the only thing keeping me from screaming was the thought of writing to him at night, as if writing was the only way to keep my name alive in someone else's soul, even if they were gone. I wrote about everything, about the pain in my knees, about the noisy neighbors, about the new color of the leaves in fall, about a dream where he returned, faceless. I wrote about the wind, about life, about the smell of rain. I wrote about the silence of the radio, about the space between one scar and the next. I signed them all as G, just that. I never knew where to send them, never knew if I should. And deep down, I think I was afraid to find out he never got any of them. Or worse, that he was alive and never answered. I kept them all, folded with surgical precision, envelopes without stamps, without addresses, just names, just questions. For years, the glove drawer was their hiding place. Then, when the first caregiver started going through my things, I moved them to the suitcase, tucked them between the lining and the rust-stained fabric. One day, I was so tired of missing him that I took the letters outside and burned them in a metal barrel. It was raining, but I did it anyway. The flames danced like they were reading out loud what I never had the courage to say. I watched fragments of sentences rise, like ash. I feel like you're somewhere words don't hurt. Today I stitched the cuff of my coat again. It still smells like you. If you've forgotten me, I'll keep writing until you remember. Half the letters turned to smoke. The other half I saved again. I guess I couldn't finish saying it all. Or maybe part of me hoped one letter might survive and tell me how the story ends. A few days ago, a new nurse found one. It was loose inside the pocket of an old coat I'd asked them not to wash. She read the first line, said, "You dream beautifully, ma'am." I just smiled. Dreaming is what I have left, and writing is the way I found to keep loving, without hurting anyone. I didn't tell her that sometimes. I hear the answers. Yes. Maybe it sounds like an old woman's delusion, but there are nights when I hear his voice, not like before, on the radio. Now it lives here, between the whisper of rain and the rustling of leaves dancing at the window. Graciela, scrivimi ancora. Non smettere mai. Graciela, write to me again. Never stop. And I haven't stopped, even without knowing, even without anywhere to send them. The letters I wrote and never sent are my map. They're the thread still, tying me to who I was, to the woman who once existed, to the nurse who stitched silence between shifts, to the lover who dared to hope in wartime. Today I reread one of them. It was stained. I don't know if from water or tears, but still legible. It said, "Luca, I'm still here, in the same world you left behind. It's still cold, still unfair. But when I write, it warms up a little." I sealed the envelope, put it back. But this time, I left it face up, as if saying, "I'm ready." Maybe one day, one of these letters will find its way. Or maybe someone will find them and understand that absence can still love, that silence can still scream, that the women of war left letters like relics, but no one cared to read them. Tonight before I sleep, I'll write another, with a trembling hand, with a calm heart, and I'll begin with, "Luca, today I remembered the sound of your whistle. My room has a window, and maybe that's the only thing I can say for certain about it. A window, a square, a cut in the white wall, and on the other side, a wall, gray, unpainted, storyless. They say rooms with a view help with recovery, but mine looks out onto nothing. And sometimes I wonder, is that why I haven't healed? I look at it every day. The wall, it changes color with the weather, but never shape, always there, steady, impenetrable. When it rains, the drops slide down the cracks like fake tears, and the sound they make on the gutter. That's the sound that hurts me most, because it's not rain, it's memory. It sounds like boots in the mud, like footsteps fading, like suitcases being dragged, like radios losing signal, like voices that never come back. Sometimes I lie down with the radio playing static. No one understands why, but I do, because inside that noise, there's a space, and in that space, I listen. I hear his voice, not full words, not full sentences, but the rhythm, the tone, as if Luca was still trying to reach me. Just this morning, at sunrise, I thought I heard, "Graciela." But maybe it was just the wind. Or maybe the nothingness knows how to speak, too. This room smells like old flannel and nameless talcum powder. There's a wooden crucifix on the wall, crooked but firm. And just beneath it, there's the photo. That one, the only one, held up with worn-out tape. Luca's eyes watching me from between a paper flower made by another lady's granddaughter and a crack in the plaster. The new caregiver came in yesterday, said my room needed more color, brought a pink pillow. I thanked her, but didn't use it. Pink doesn't match with nothing. She also asked, "Who's the man in the picture?" I paused, thought, breathed, and said, "He was the operator who taught me how to listen beyond the pain." She looked at me like someone staring at a painting with no caption, smiled, and left. But me, I stayed with that sentence echoing inside, because it's true. Luca taught me to listen beyond pain, to hear what's behind the loss, what beats in the silence, what lives in the empty spaces. This room is full of absences. Absence of visits, absence of medals, absence of records. But it's also the space where my whole story still lives. Under the bed, the suitcase still breathes. Every time the world forgets me, it sighs, and I hear it. It tells me, you existed, you loved, you survived. Even when no one else remembers. Today I noticed a new crack in the corner of the wall. Maybe from the rain. Maybe the building's as tired as I am. But I looked at it like someone reading a letter, and I thought, there, in that crack, lives a piece of my story too. The nurse who never existed. The woman who wrote 100 letters and never sent them. The one who stitched silence into the folds of her apron. You know, sometimes I wonder if there's, somewhere in this world, another room with a view of nothing. If there's another woman staring at a wall, trying to hear through the static, trying to remember a name that only lives in the inner pocket of memory. I wish I could tell her that we survive, that even without a window to the sky, the soul finds openings. That even without an altar there are saints hiding in cloth. That even without an answer, love keeps writing. Tonight when it gets dark, I'll leave the window open, even if there's only a wall, because I've learned that nothingness speaks too. And sometimes, that's where Luca whistles. At the edge of the bed, his handkerchief moved. Or it was the wind. Or it was him. It had been there for decades, folded with care, tucked between the stained coat and the stitched-up notes. The handkerchief, white originally, now aged into ivory, with the letter L embroidered in faded blue on the lower right corner, and just beneath it, the date of our last meeting, May 17th, 1955. I never had the courage to take it out. It was my relic, my silent testament. The last thing he gave me without words. Just a look, just fingers grazing my cheek one final time, before the transfer order. And today, it fell. It was the caregiver, the youngest one, the same one who fixed the crooked crucifix. She was cleaning under the bed and pulled the suitcase too hard. The latch gave way, and the handkerchief slipped across the floor like a leaf that finally lets go of the branch after resisting the season. I saw it, saw the fall, saw the impact, and I swear on everything I've ever loved. My chest cracked with it. She bent down, picked it up, and with the innocence of someone who doesn't know what they're holding, asked, "This one's a little dirty. Want me to wash it?" I said no. Not like someone refusing a favor, but like someone stopping a disappearance. "No," I whispered, throat full of memories. "This one doesn't get washed." She furrowed her brow, smiled gently, and respected it. I held it again, with both hands. Like someone holding a heart still warm, the handkerchief feels like the past, thinner than I remembered. Maybe because it aged with me, or maybe because when I touch it, I'm also touching everything that was left unsaid. It wiped a single tear from my face, the only tear Luca ever saw fall. That late afternoon, behind the infirmary, between empty boxes and silent pine trees. He looked at me. Just looked. And then, without a word, pulled the handkerchief from his pocket and brushed it beneath my left eye. No kiss, no promise, no signature, just gave it to me. And that was enough. I never let anyone else wipe my tears again. I kept that handkerchief the way others keep wedding rings, photographs, or final wills. And it stayed there, hidden, waiting for the right moment to slip back into the world. Today was that day, the day the handkerchief fell from the suitcase. I looked at it for a long time. Longer than I should have, longer than anyone expected. Held it to my chest, closed my eyes, and let that one forgotten tear inside me find its way back out. It fell, slow, silent, and settled in the same spot he once touched. In that moment, I understood what the fall meant. The handkerchief was ready, not to be washed, but to be remembered. To be seen, to say, without speaking, he existed, he loved me. And I never forgot him. The suitcase stayed open, for the first time in 70 years. I left it like that, like someone opening a wound not to bleed, but to breathe. I folded the handkerchief again, but this time I didn't hide it. I placed it on the table between the radio and the crooked crucifix. When the caregiver came back, she saw it, asked, "Was it his?" I just nodded. She didn't ask anything else. She walked out slowly, leaving the room in peace, leaving the handkerchief to rest, leaving my story visible, even if no one ever reads it fully. Outside, the rain started again, and for a moment, the sound wasn't droplets. It was footsteps, soft ones, the kind that approach without fear. I closed my eyes, and I heard it. Graciela! It was the radio's crackle. Or it was him. Or maybe it was my silence, finally brave enough to answer after decades. Tonight, the darkness arrived more gently, as if it knew there was nothing left to hide, as if the world had finally understood that even those forgotten in books can leave behind a trace of love time cannot erase. That handkerchief, that room, this tired body, they're all witnesses to the last tear, the last touch, the last thread of hope. And if tomorrow I don't wake up, it's okay. The handkerchief is here, out in the open, in the light, where everything that was denied finally shows itself. The radio crackled very softly, and I smiled. It was just a simple gesture, a soft click of a button, a shy crackle breaking the air, like someone politely asking to return. The radio started working again, after years of whispering nothing but static, after days of sitting like a decorative ghost in the dining hall of the forgotten. It woke up, no warning, no intention. It was late afternoon. The light slipped through the window pane like a needle through thin skin. We were all seated for dinner. Lukewarm soup, soggy bread, the silence of routine. One of the nurses, new, Sweet in a hurry to live. Brought the radio in a box. Said her husband fixed it. For nostalgia's sake. She wanted to cheer up the old folks. That's what she said. No one paid much attention. But I froze. I watched as the device was placed in the corner of the room. Small. Boxy. With buttons yellowed by time. Just like the one we had in the communications tent. Just like the one that carried his voice. Luca. When she turned the volume knob, the familiar static filled the room like an old prayer. I closed my eyes. Out of instinct. Out of fear. And then came the music. It wasn't Italian. It wasn't a hymn. It was an instrumental melody, old, made of strings and soft wind. But it was his. Luca used to whistle that tune when he saw me sad, or when he wanted to catch my attention without speaking. It was his way of finding me through the pain. The sound entered my ears like it was entering through my skin, and I was there again, in the camp, between pines, sitting behind the supply tent, with him leaning beside me, eyes closed, whistling. In that moment, there was no dining hall, no soup, no wrinkles. There was snow, and the scent of penicillin, and cold wind brushing against the handkerchief he had given me. The radio kept playing. Someone murmured, "That's beautiful. Sounds like a movie soundtrack." But to me, it was the soundtrack of life, the score of all I had been, of everything I'd lost. I felt my eyes close on their own, not like someone falling asleep, but like someone traveling. I saw the apron hanging on the bunk room doorknob, saw his shadow walking away, carrying the cross he once returned to me, saw the mist of our breath in the frozen air when we promised each other a summer that never came. The music faded slowly, like it was saying goodbye, like it whispered, "You're not crazy. I'm still here." And then, without being able to stop it, I cried, quietly, without fuss, without anyone noticing. I cried with shame, with relief, with that kind of pain that doesn't ache. It excavates. It was the first time in many years I allowed myself to collapse, without fear of seeming weak, without fear of being seen, because in that instant, I knew. Luca had reached me. The radio that worked again wasn't just a repaired device. It was a sign that the story doesn't end just because others forget, that the sounds of war still echo in the bones of those who survived. That night, I asked to keep the radio a little longer. They brought it to me, placed it on the nightstand beside the crooked photo. I turned the dial. The static returned. I smiled. And we sat there, he and I, in that musical silence. For the first time in a long time, the room didn't feel so tight. The wall outside the window looked smaller. The suitcase felt lighter. And the handkerchief felt like it was breathing. Before I fell asleep, I whispered, "If it's you, keep whistling. I'm listening now." The radio creaked, and for just a second I heard that melody again. Today, for the first time, I taped the photograph myself. No help, no asking, no waiting for someone to give me permission. I climbed onto the chair with the caution of someone carrying decades on her back and stretched my trembling arm until I found the right spot. I didn't measure. I didn't align it with the crucifix. I didn't match it to the paper flower. I stuck it on crooked, because truth rarely comes out straight. It's there now, above the headboard, yellowed, folded, unyielding, between two frames that were never really mine. The faith I left behind, and the hope of another woman's granddaughter. His photograph, Luca. The masking tape holds by miracle. But maybe it's not a miracle. Maybe it's will. Mine. His I spent years hiding that photo, folded at the bottom of the suitcase, shielded from the world, shielded from forgetting. But also, in silence, condemned to invisibility. Not anymore. Today I decided he needed to exist for others too, because that's what love deserves. A place. In the picture, he's wearing a tilted beret, smiling with eyes squinting against the sun. He's in the simple uniform of the radio operators, hands in his pockets, and behind him, almost out of focus, a tarp sways in the wind. I can almost hear it. I can almost see my shadow there, just outside the frame. Whoever walks into this room now might ask who he was. And if they do, I'll say, he was the man who taught me how to listen when the world was screaming. He was the one who gave me back my cross after God had already left. He was the one who wiped away a single tear and made it into a relic. Maybe no one will believe it. Maybe they'll say I made it up, like they did when they couldn't find my name in the archives, like they did when I read my letter out loud in the garden, and they looked at me with pity. But I don't need to prove anything anymore, because the photograph is there. And every night, before I turn off the lamp, I look at it and whisper, "You were real, Luca. And you loved me in the winter. That's it. That's enough. I did it for me. But also for the others. For the women of war who stitched wounds and came home with empty hands. For those who wrote letters and never got a reply. For those who returned with no uniform, no medal, no name. We were the forgotten heroes. But today, at least in this room, at least on this wall, a memory won. I didn't need a frame. I didn't need official recognition. All I needed was tape, courage, and time. 70 years. 70! That's how long it took me to let love come out of the suitcase. And now, there it is. Present. Unfading. In a room with a view of nothing, but with too much memory to be ignored. Yesterday, the caregiver walked by and paused in front of the photo, looked at it with respect, and simply said, "He looks like he loved you very much." And I smiled. Because sometimes, you don't need to explain. You just need to show. That photo is my late justice, my headstone in the form of a living memory. My altar made of paper. And when I'm gone, I know it will fall with time. The tape will give way. The ink will fade. The paper will fold in on itself. But for a few days, for a few nights, for a few souls passing through, it will be visible. And someone will look, and they will feel, even if they don't understand, that there was love, that there was loss, that there was courage, that there was a woman named Graciela, a nurse without a diploma, a veteran with no record, a mother of unsent letters, a lover of a man who disappeared into radio waves but never vanished inside her. And that woman ends this letter today by looking at the wall and saying, "Thank you, Luca. You listened to me until the very end. Now, I rest." The radio still crackles, but the room is at peace, you know. Time is a strange thing. It doesn't heal like they say. It stitches from the inside, with thread so fine, it's almost invisible. And if we don't speak, silence becomes a scar that no one sees. But we feel every time we try to sleep. For years I thought what I lived wasn't worth telling. After all, no one ever wrote down my name. But now I know. Some stories don't need to be in any book to be true. They live in the hands, in the eyes, in the folded handkerchief that never left the suitcase. These days, I live slowly. I write when I can. I look out the window and see the same wall, but with less anger now. I have grandchildren, though few of them know who I was. They think I'm just a quiet old lady. But you heard me. And for that, thank you. If this story touched any part of you, take care of it, gently, in silence, if needed. But don't leave it alone the way I left mine for so long. If you'd like to stay a little longer, subscribe to the channel, like the video, or share it with someone else who keeps a handkerchief that's never been washed. Sometimes, all a life really needs is a sincere ear and a story with no rush to end. Thank you, dear. Take it slow. And if you can, come listen to me again one of these days.